Hey everyone, new episode of the Seaman Hour. We are joined right now by Matt Staggs, who is the host of the Disinfo cast on iTunes, and also the editorial director of Disinformation at disinfo.com. And for those 2 or 3 people out there who don't know what Disinfo is, could you maybe explain it to them?
Sure. Disinfo.com is a website. Well, actually, let's talk about the disinformation company. It's been around for a long time, and it is a leader in providing sort of these stories slip through the cracks and reportage on kind of stuff that might escape the mainstream, but is just really fascinating and needs a wider story. It's a multimedia company that's produced movies, books, TV shows, you name it. The website, which is what I'm the editorial director of, has a constant stream of fascinating stories, interviews. We've tried to focus on kind of, mondo culture, weird science, breaking stories of various sorts, the unexplained, that kind of thing. Stuff that you're not necessarily going to get anywhere else. Yeah,
cool. I think that's a good summary. It's really necessary to have services and sites like that because so much does. I don't think it escapes the mainstream media's radar. I think it is intentionally ignored in a lot of cases. For example, that Fukushima thing, the nuclear reactor in Japan, that issue has not gone away. And
that's absolutely right, and that's a good distinction to make. We do like to think of the media as being a huge organism that envelops everything. But it may very well be so. But if we're going to think about it that way, then we might as well hold them to the fire, when they don't cover these kind of stories that need to be covered. Maybe slipping through the crack isn't the right way to think about it.
Yeah. Speaking of things slipping through the crack, there has been this massive protest over the past 48 hours in Madrid, Spain. And the Western media, for the most part, has not covered it all that much. There was I got a tweet earlier today. Somebody pointed out that the international edition of CNN's website ran a headline. Let me see if I can bring up the actual headline. If it's still up there. They took it down. I guess people noticed. But I'm going to give me 1 second here to find it. Oh, here we go. It's still on the site. They moved it higher. They didn't take it down. They actually moved it higher. Such arrogance. Spain gliding slowly toward a bailout? And so Spain gliding slowly toward a bailout. That is actually the headline right now at 7:18 p.m. East Coast time on the international edition of CNN's homepage. This is the version that people in Europe are seeing. And the reality is not that people in Spain are, they have their legs crossed and they're slowly sipping an espresso and having this intellectual debate of, are we gliding slowly toward a new bailout? There are tens of thousands of people in the street protesting and demonstrating, and based on the videos that are emerging on YouTube, it's been quite violent when the police have interacted with some of the protesters. Here's just a clip from YouTube. Obviously, listeners can't see it, but if you want to search for this later on, it's called Madrid, Spain Riots. Police beat up protesters outside Congress. Crazy footage of night. That's the whole title. And what we're actually seeing right now is a line of police beating back protesters with signs and flags, actually beating them back, running at them with batons and just indiscriminately beating people. And then they grab one guy and bring him back behind police lines, back near the police van. And there are people photographing this, and it's crazy. And then a chant breaks out later on. Let's see. So you get the idea. Does that sound like a nation that's gliding slowly toward a bailout? That sounds like a city on the verge of a total meltdown.
Well, why should Americans worry about that when they have Honey Boo Boo? I think that's part of the problem is that we are kind of fed this sort of, pablum that passes for information. that really isn't. I mean, it's just a constant distraction machine to keep us on track with whatever best benefits corporations and other traditional power holders,
Right.
in my opinion. And the fact that any of us are even getting any of this information at all, if anything, could be attributed, I think, to the internet. The way the story is managed, of course, is pretty hilarious. It's both arrogant in the sense that we're looking down at these people. Might there be a bailout? Are they gliding toward it? And it is minimizing the real situation there. But it's not that different from what they did with, and still do with, Occupy Wall Street. I was speaking with Lee Camp, who I believe now is a mutual friend of ours, about the reality of Occupy Wall Street, that even right now it continues. And it's a vital movement. But, there's practically nothing on the news about it. And if you want to really hear something, you've got to talk to people on the ground. You've got to get a hold of people on Twitter and Facebook and catch stuff on YouTube, because as far as the media is concerned, the story's over. And I think it's the same thing with this. Let's keep watching the TV and let's pretend this has no connection to us, because we can still watch Honey Boo Boo and, eat a son of Baconator.
Yeah, Lee's a great dude. He was just on this show. He's really fun to talk to. What is a Honey Boo Boo? I feel stupid here.
It's a delicious dessert now available from Burger King. It comes in two sizes. No, it's some kind of TV show. I haven't actually watched it. It's about a kind of little toddler beauty star or something. I don't really watch much TV at all. I don't have time. I have 3 or 4 jobs. So,
yeah. Well, speaking of not having time, I feel like so many Americans just don't, like, people are constantly tired. I speak to people, and they tell me how tired they are, and I think part of it's the diet, and part of it's commuting to work, and part of it's how tedious certain parts of our lives have become. But people are tired, and they're distracted, and they're just trying to make ends meet, so it's very hard for them to, after a long day of work, spend 2 or 3 hours networking on Twitter to find out what's actually happening in the U.S. in terms of protests and violent crackdowns and all that stuff.
Well, yeah, it's a lot of that. It reminds me of the famous monologue from Network, where the guy's like, just leave me alone. You let me have my TV and my toaster. It's that kind of thing. We're willing to concede certain amounts of our knowledge of the world in exchange for a blissful ignorance. We make these sorts of deals with the devil, because you're right. When we get home from work, whether we're, smashing stones on the side of the road or, sitting staring at a blinking computer monitor for 9 hours straight, or, doing something else that's completely just dehumanizing and destructive to the soul, we don't want to hear about any more trouble. And I can't blame people for that. I don't want to hear about trouble either. I'd much rather come home and watch, TV or play Call of Duty or read a book. But, sometimes we're called to do something differently. Sometimes we have to stand up to our, to those that might not want us to stand up, and do our duty as citizens.
Yeah, and I think it becomes easier to do these things when you make the shift away from considering it a duty to it's kind of fun, taking part in your own society and your own political system is fun, and spreading information is fun. The first couple months I started getting interested in this stuff, it was a scary, lonely place, because none of your immediate contacts know anything about this stuff, and they're kind of freaked out that you're suddenly interested in it. But then you start to build out, a network of people who have similar interests, and it goes back to being fun. It's just like picking up a new video game or picking up a new sport.
Right, it is fun. And some of us are natural, broadcasters, be it in the sense that we wander around telling our friends and family about things, or that we tweet, or that we take to the airwaves or the internet in one way or the other. And I think people like this that carry this signal are obligated in some way to spread it. And it is very fulfilling if that's something you like to do. I myself, and I guess anybody that follows me on Twitter knows, I just love it. I love sharing as much interesting information as possible. And part of that is kind of keeping track of some of these more, let's say, less desirable stories that are going on around the world.
Yeah, when we talk about less desirable stories, this is something I came across earlier today that really put things into perspective for me. So there's Gary Johnson. He's a former governor and a Ironman triathlete. He has summited Everest. He's summited Mount Everest before. He's a mountain climber. And he also founded his own company. So he has, self-made wealth. And this guy, Gary Johnson, so many of my readers and followers have been asking me for months to check this dude out and see what he's all about. And I'm kind of an obstinate person. When I start getting a lot of requests, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'll get around to it. And I finally got around to checking out this guy's campaign ads on YouTube, his campaign videos that are going to be airing on TV. And this one sent a chill down my spine because you have a guy that's that credible, a former governor, a two-term governor, and a successful entrepreneur, and a guy who's climbed to the top of Mount Everest, now telling fellow Americans this. Here's the campaign ad.
America today is no longer the land of the free and the home of the brave. It is the land of government spying, snooping, and scrutinizing American citizens without their knowledge. It is a land where you can be arrested without charges and detained indefinitely without a phone call or a trial. This is the land Republicans and Democrats built. America of Barack Obama and the America of Mitt Romney. The people now running America have a different idea of freedom than the people who founded it. Gary Johnson wants a different America. He wants an America without the wars, the taxes, the spending, the lousy economy, the job.
You get the idea. He's the libertarian candidate for president, and that's one of his campaign videos. But how chilling is that we've gotten to the point in America where you're going to start seeing in the next couple of weeks a commercial on TV that reminds people that you no longer have the right to a trial and that the government is putting your information into a server farm. That's chilling. I mean, the video shows just an endless row of servers in some government building.
And to me, even the more frightening thing about it is that this can be on TV, and a large percentage of people are not going to think that you're a nut. That a larger percentage than ever, I think, are waking up to that things are changing here. There are some people that are absolutely calcified in the support for this or that candidate or this or that platform. But, quite a few people are, at least the ones I'm talking to, and maybe I'm just living in this rarefied air, on Twitter and whatever, but are becoming aware of these major threats to our liberty. Now, what, if anything, we can do about it, I don't know. Unfortunately, Gary Johnson probably has a snowball's chance in hell of actually getting elected. From what I see, he can't even debate. Isn't allowed to. I'm sure he's a quite capable debater. But he's out there, and the fact that we really can't support someone like that with substantive resources available to us, like TV and things like this, really says something about how the game is really, played. That it's shell game at this point. We have these great resources, but we somehow can't share them with anybody with a different idea.
Yeah. Well, you said sometimes you wonder if this is sort of a rarefied circle, and I think it was at first. I don't think it is anymore. You look at the traffic that this show gets before we switched over to unmetered bandwidth, where now we don't have to keep an eye on how much traffic we're doing because we pay one price. But on the old plan, we're up to 3.8 terabytes in a 2-week span. So that comes out to 3,800 gigabytes of people downloading these small audio files, 20 megabyte files. That means that a lot of people out there are listening, and mine isn't even the most popular podcast of this nature. And certainly sites like Disinfo draw in a huge amount of traffic, and there are a number of, I guess you could call them hubs on Twitter and Facebook, these groups that just promote truth and information, and they're really taking down the mainstream media because people are going to go somewhere for information. And if it's no longer being provided on TV, then they're just going to go online, and that's what's happening.
You're right. I've seen the same thing. It's funny to me now to watch someone stumble across a story on Twitter and cover it and do it to death. Everybody's talking about it. Then 3 or 4 days later, CNN comes along, or Fox, or MSN. Oh, by the way, we just heard of this thing. It's like, well, you're about a week late.
And then they do the watered down, damage control version.
Right.
What
and,
the story
it's
is.
like those guys, speaking of watered down, they don't know the water's going over the dam. Those guys, have not figured out yet, or if they have, they're not doing a very good job of transitioning, that this whole thing is sliding right out from under them. People don't want to listen to them anymore. They know they don't have any credibility. I mean, it's basically, and I include the major presidential candidates right now as a sort of extended Punch and Judy. It's just, it doesn't mean anything. It's just, like a night at the fights.
Yeah, the issues are so superficial. They talk about freedom and liberty, and yet they support policies that are about as anti-freedom and anti-liberty as you can get. And neither of them are normal people. You have Barack Obama, who is one of the most powerful people who has ever existed on this planet. Between his warrantless wiretapping program and his secret kill lists and his army of predator drones and all of this stuff, he's like 100 times more powerful than a Roman emperor would have been in his day. And so you have that guy who's going to be going up against Mitt Romney, who is like the definition of a corporate insider. So neither of these people are normal, and they're kind of jockeying to be seen as the more normal of the two. Like, I'm just an everyday person with jeans on, and I go to the diner like everybody else. It's just so absurd, and I think kind of insulting to the rest of us.
Yeah, I think so too. There's no hiding the fact that these guys aren't Joe Average, and even worse, there's no hiding the fact that Joe Average has no chance of becoming the president anymore. This is absolutely not a game that average people like you or I or many of our listeners can play. What are we going to do? It's we've got voting machines that are under question as to whether they're accurate or not. We've got presidents that don't listen to the mandate we provide them when they're elected. We've got congressmen and senators that are just basically saying, if you want my attention, write me a check, coming out and saying that sort of thing. What do we do? It's frustrating. I was saying on Twitter a while back to someone of another country, another nationality, I said, look, the thing you need to understand at this point is that, we live in a tunnel of fear, that only a little bit of light flickers in occasionally, but we live in a tunnel of fear and misinformation thanks to the media. And our politicians aren't really listening to us. We don't really have much choice. Most of us don't want a war in Iran. Most of us want out of Afghanistan. Most of us want pot to be legal. All these things are there, but they're just not listening to us anymore.
Yeah, and you mentioned pot should be legal. It really is pretty obscene that there's this powerful pharmaceutical lobby that makes it okay for people to get hooked on things like OxyContin or Xanax or something like that, and you never hear of cases of Timmy was a great kid until he got hooked on marijuana, and now the funeral's next week. You never hear that. But
you will, but you'll hear it from like the ad council and people like that. You won't actually hear that many actual stories. You'll see the narratives on TV, though, which ultimately, in a very sad way, are more important than the facts themselves because they become facts when people believe them, or as good as facts.
Yeah, it's kind of evil. I mean, you're promoting these drugs. You're promoting these drugs that ruin people's livers and are highly addictive. And can kill you if you take too many by accident or you mix it with alcohol or something like that. They can kill you. And then you have marijuana, something that's been used by human beings for thousands of years. It grows naturally. Its nickname is weed because it's found everywhere. And in the history of humankind, not a single person has ever overdosed on it. And yet that is the one that you go to jail for decades if you're caught up in the system or if you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, in the same room as somebody who is selling it. It's just absurd.
Well, one part about the marijuana policy that I think most people are aware of now is that it's largely a racist policy. Who gets arrested most for pot? Who gets put in jail longer for pot? Minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, things like that. And what's interesting about the drug policy is that actually that is how it started. If you go back far enough in the history of marijuana in the Americas, the Mexican laborers were smoking it, in the very early 20th century. And our guys wanted those guys out of the country and wanted to make things difficult for them here. And so one of the things they did was outlaw their marijuana, but it's just as arbitrary as anything else, outlawing anything that just grows out of the ground. I only recently really started thinking about the fact that hallucinogenic mushrooms are illegal. I don't even use the things, but the fact that something that grows in cow pastures here, of which we have many in Mississippi, that I could walk out any night and find growing on a piece of cow dung is illegal for me to pick up and to ingest is just mind-blowing. And you're right, the OxyContin, the Xanax, all these sorts of chemicals, sometimes they have their place. I've known someone that was dying of cancer. They needed their OxyContin, but to every person like that, there's, 1,000 people that are just plain hooked. And, I worked in a mental hospital for a little while, and we dealt with a lot of what you'd call dual diagnosis patients that were hooked on OxyContin. And this was in the very late 90s and early 2000s when this started coming through. And, man, I just saw people's lives ruined. I mean, they can't go longer than half an hour without an oxy pill. That's all they think about. They're just fouled up, in every possible way, mentally, physically, emotionally. But you're right, that stuff's legal. They have a whole strip in Florida where you can just drive down and pick this stuff up just as easily as you could go to a farmer's market, basically.
Yeah, the other thing that's crazy in kind of the health world right now is this whole debate over GMOs, genetically modified foods. And I'm going to be having a woman on Friday who's a friend of mine, and she's going to talk about this proposition in California to label GMOs. And it is just so crazy that in certain states, I believe it's actually illegal, and they will come after you if you try to label your food as being not genetically modified. I mean, isn't that a violation not only of freedom of speech, but of the most basic transparency ideals, that you are allowed to label that your food does not contain kind of like zombie genetically modified stuff?
Yeah, I think so. But the fact that they can make you do a lot of things that are suddenly compulsory, or they'll do them to you and just not tell you, is frightening. And it's becoming, all the more prevalent in our society, in life in the fear tunnel here. And you're right. I completely agree with you. These things, apparently there's rumors going around that they cause, tumors in rodents, that there's lab studies that, these GMO things, they're not that good for us. We don't really know what they do. And, we're putting this stuff into the food chain. It's going to go everywhere. And the fact that they don't want us to know which ones is which, what does that tell you? If you're scared to let me know exactly what you're doing, then there's probably a good reason why you're hiding it.
Yeah, most definitely. I think whenever you're faced with a situation like that where the company doesn't want you to know what's in their product, the first question you should ask is, why is that? Same with cigarettes. Why don't you want us to know all of the ingredients? That was an issue years ago, and I think it still is an issue to some extent. But do you know anything about that?
Yeah. We living in Mississippi, that was kind of a big thing here. The big tobacco trials actually occurred in this state. I think there's a movie about it. I want to say it's called The Insider, that tells the story of a chemist that was working for the tobacco company that came out and whistleblowed on the whole industry. And I mean, you can download now all these documents that were seized, from the history of these huge tobacco companies, where they were, actively experimenting in ways to make the stuff more addictive, working on, social programming to infiltrate every aspect of the market from birth to death, and how to inculcate new smokers. And this is a legal industry. It's still legal. We still have this. And right, they didn't want to tell anybody about what's in there because, there's like radioactive material in cigarettes. Did you know that?
That I actually did know.
Yeah.
But most people do not know that. And if you were to tell them that, they would think that you were going off in a tinfoil hat land,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's the funny thing about like conspiracies and things like that. And I irritate people sometimes because I'm super skeptical of conspiracy theories. But the problem is when you start looking for the really far out there stuff, you start missing the things that are just right under your nose. And this tobacco thing is one of them. You don't have to have reptoids, putting mind control agents in the fluoride when you have a huge multinational conglomerate shoving radioactive crap and, rat poison in something and selling it to you at the corner store.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning the reptoid thing, the reptilian theories.
Well, the reptoids would be pissed if I didn't mention it on the show. So.
I've met people who believe in that stuff, and they're like, look, dude, what you're doing is you're never going to succeed because the people in power are shape-shifting reptiles. And I think figuratively that's true, but not literally. I've met some of these powerful people, and they're just misguided and greedy, and about as disconnected as you can get. And they need to retire and find some of those mushrooms in the cow patty. I think they need to do that. I don't think they need to be seen as reptiles. I think they're just highly misguided people, and people do evil stuff. You give somebody too much power and not enough accountability and a clear incentive to do wrong, either financial or self-protection, they're going to do that in a lot of cases.
Well, that sounds like something David Seaman would say, doesn't it? My reptoid friend. No, I completely agree with you. And, some of this, I love this kind of thing. I didn't get into working with Disinfo because I dislike weird stuff, and most things I say there's either a zero chance or a slightly greater than zero chance of. And I'm going to say the reptoid space aliens are pretty damn close to zero. That being said, I think these sorts of, cultural, mega myths have the potential to start people thinking in creative new ways. I've known people that became interested in Bigfoot, and then suddenly became interested in apes and, gorillas and chimpanzees and primates and evolution. I'm one of those people. I still love Bigfoot, but, I like to read Jane Goodall's work. I'm interested in bonobos and that kind of thing. But I never would have gotten there had I not started picking up, spooky-looking books at the library when I was a 12-year-old. So the reptoids get you thinking in some way about maybe the fact is that there are people that are a little misguided or maybe just outright predatory, then good on it. But the important thing is that you continue, like with all these things, like all your beliefs, to evolve them as time goes by.
Yeah, you mentioning gorillas got me thinking about something I saw recently. It was a video of a speech that Neil Tyson gave, and someone asked him, what is the most, startling thing you can tell us? The most startling idea. And I might be, somewhat messing this up, but what he said is he considers the most startling idea that we are, 99 point something the same DNA as a chimpanzee. And
99.6.
Okay, 99.6, and yet we're capable of building nuclear weapons and building the internet and sending things out into space and all of this stuff. And they're capable of sticking a stick into an ant colony and licking some ants, So if we're that close and we're such a quantum leap ahead of them in terms of what we're capable of, maybe there's something out there in the universe that is just a little 0.04% more advanced than us, and that thing is able to look at the most complex equations and figure it out immediately, and is able to do space travel close to the speed of light and all of this crazy stuff. And if you look at how many Earth-like planets are out there, it's almost a statistical certainty that there's something else out there. I don't think this massive universe was created just to house a tiny little Earth,
No, I completely agree with you. And one of the things that I've come to know, and, I don't know much, is that, at least in my mind, it's absolutely impossible to clearly define what God, the universe, or consciousness means. And when I say God, I don't necessarily mean an anthropomorphic deity or an intelligent force or, the absence or presence thereof. I mean, it's just an impossible concept. If to an ant crawling around in an ant hill, my existence is probably incomprehensible. It can't understand anything about me. And I feel the same way about these three things. I don't understand anything about the spiritual aspect, if there is one, of the universe and the world. I don't understand how consciousness works. I mean, they're doing research now that shows that in the split nanosecond before you decide to do something, the thought to do that already occurred in the, some other part of your brain, a preconscious part of your brain. So
Wow.
We really don't even know, why we think or how we think or if we're thinking. And, we're experiencing the world through these, little cameras in our head and, our noses and ears, and it's just a picture we're building. And with the universe, it's impossible to understand infinity. Put this all together, we are a very blind, grasping little creature. It's like we're like one of those spiders or water bugs that walk across the water gliders. We're walking on this thin surface, and God only knows what's beneath the waves. What is down there. We're just barely there. So if there was intelligent life, how would we recognize it? How would we judge it? How would we comprehend it? If their ways are far more advanced than ours, like that 0.4% that you're talking about. It'd be like me trying to explain this podcast to a tadpole. And it's just not going to happen.
Or even you look at a dog, and dogs live with us, and they're very savvy, very emotionally intelligent creatures who can read human emotions to some extent, and read voice tone, and even recognize English words or human words. And they see you typing on a computer and sending an email, and they don't really have any idea what you're doing. They can't comprehend it. As far as I know, I'm not like the dog whisperer, but you think about that, and I think that's startling too. That there's something that is able to get along with us and that we consider a companion.
Oh yeah, man, I've said it many times. Is sometimes you start thinking about these things that you take completely for granted, and dogs are one of the weirdest things on earth. You think about this animal that we've basically taken and genetically modified through our history and its history, and made it into this creature. Its facial expressions are different from its wild, kin. It's just physically different. That it can read our expressions, and it can communicate back to us, in a way that we understand. It's just really strange that we've made this, companion animal. We just take it for granted. The dog is different from anything else we have. And it just sounds, it sounds crazy if you start telling people, hey, man, have you really thought about the dogs? But, it's just an example of how weird life really is.
Well, dogs are kind of like the original technology, in the same way that a laptop allows you to do more than you could do on your own. If you were some caveman or in a small tribe, domesticating a dog would provide you with an added layer of protection and a scout for hunting and give you that edge.
Well, there's a theory, David, that actually one of the ways that we managed to outcompete the Neanderthals is that we had dogs.
Wow. There are videos on YouTube of, I think, either gorillas or chimpanzees like catching dogs and then domesticating them. Baboons, that's it.
Yeah, baboons do it, and that is something you definitely need to look up. I think they live in these huge trash heaps, these junkyards, and kidnap these dogs and basically raise them in their own crude fashion. So, maybe we're only a few steps away from our own little rise to the Planet of the Apes. So, but you're right about the dogs. My own dog was here just a second ago and was kind of causing trouble. And I shook my head and gave her kind of an irritated look and pointed out of the room. And she looked right at me and walked right on out. That's pretty amazing for an animal.
Yeah, I would love to jump in a time machine and see what happened in our past, because you look at how much tension and violence is in the world today, where we disagree with people of the with other beings of the same species, just based on what our religious beliefs are and what's written on paper. There was a time on this planet where there were hominid species fighting each other for dominance, like different species of not humans but humanoids fighting for the planet. That seems completely crazy.
Right, that's absolutely true, and it's a lot closer in time than what people think, especially on more of a grand scale. There are people that even think that some of our folk tales about goblins and monsters of various sorts are, in part ancestral memory of running in and dealing with these other, creatures and I'm struggling for the right word, hominids, I think is the word I'm looking for. These other kind of proto-hominids. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it's an interesting idea. But, there had to have been some great degree of violence. I don't think of any I can't think of any species that would go quietly, into oblivion. So, yeah, you're right. What would have been like then? And how are we evolving now? Well, people look back and look and say, wow, there were 3 or 4 different species of, humans living then, and none of them were aware of it. I mean, who knows? Who knows where we're evolving now? Have you ever looked at those the gray aliens that people say kidnap them, and thought about how much they resemble our own sort of subconscious ideas of what our next evolutionary step would look like?
I haven't thought about that, but that makes sense. And you look at if you were to take a human being today, and what would be useful to us a couple thousand years from now, you'd probably want really big eyes, good vision for computer screens.
Huge brain.
Yeah, huge brain. You wouldn't
tiny atrophied body.
Yeah, exactly, because you'd be sitting behind a control panel, or you'd be what's it called? Probing humans from the past on an operating table. So you don't need much in the way of a physical body,
Yeah, and I'm not saying that those are necessarily out there or anything. I just like to look at things in terms of their cultural context and what people say about them. But it's an interesting idea. The whole UFO thing is something that you could literally talk about for the next your lifetime basically, and never actually reach the bottom of. But speaking of probing bottom, sorry.
I'm glad we're talking about this stuff and not just like congressional politics, because it gets there are times when it kind of gets you down, because it's this institutional, slow, corrupt thing to talk about. And there's so many other exciting topics in the world, like this stuff. But the alien thing, there are a couple of Hollywood actresses out there who actually believe that, I think in like the late 40s or early 50s, several alien species met with the U.S. government and basically signed these secret accords. And I think Shirley MacLaine is one of the people who believes this. And I don't buy any of that stuff. I think it'd make for a great movie. But the reason why I don't buy any of it, and maybe you can prove me wrong here, is that based on what Carl Sagan has said, any like intelligent being that would visit the Earth is almost guaranteed to be more than 5,000 years more advanced than we are. And if you look at where the human race might be technologically in 5,000 years, we would probably have no interest in these primitive humans that we are today. And so the idea of something that powerful and advanced, sitting down with the U.S. government for secret talks out in the Nevada desert somewhere, just seems ludicrous to me.
Well, I think the idea is kind of ludicrous, but to entertain it for a moment, we're quite more advanced than those bonobos we were talking about a little while ago, yet we still study them, don't we? We still make efforts to communicate with them. We take them away and experiment on them. Can you not imagine that? Could you get in the mind of a chimpanzee and look at a human being? I mean, would you think that we were their gray aliens?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good rebuttal of sorts. And the other thing that I think is cool is people go like, I haven't seen a UFO, so there's no way that this exists. But someone, I think this was on a podcast, someone brought up the point that, not my podcast, by the way, somebody else's. They brought up the point that just in the same way that like when we go to observe the gorillas, Jane Goodall or whatever would do that stuff, she wouldn't be in a helicopter above them, like observing them that way in the most obvious way possible. She would be hiding in the brush and kind of acting like them. And maybe if you're some super advanced alien species, the easiest way to observe humans is to pretend to be one, or to pretend to be a light post or a mailbox or something like that,
Well, the late chronicler of the weird, John Alva Keel, had these ideas about something he called ultra-terrestrials. And more or less the theory he had, and I think it was one born of just frustration after researching so much odd stuff and never finding a conclusive answer or anything that even really made sense, is that our reality, our dimension, if you will, is shared. It overlaps with another one, and that we share our existence with other intelligent entities of some sort that are, not necessarily within our frame of perception. Occasionally they blink in, they blink out, and they're incomprehensible. We don't understand what they want or why they're there or why they appear the way they do. He wrote a book about it called Disneyland of the Gods, as a matter of fact. And, I'm going to avoid cursing, but I think I've always summarized that book as, long story short, they're effing with us. You know,
You have to curse at least once, so I can put the explicit tag on this.
Yeah, anyway, that's what his ideas were, and I agree. Were they here? Why would they ever let us know to begin with? I'm reading a book right now, actually, on the topic of UFOs called Mirage Men. It's by Mark Pilkington, a UFO researcher and chronicler of the odd himself in the UK. And the book is actually about how the CIA, and here, indulge me when I say CIA, but the CIA and the Air Force and some other aspects of our defense and intelligence parts of our government kind of worked up the UFO myth and took advantage of it to accomplish various goals like obfuscating the creation of experimental military technologies, aircrafts, munitions, things like that. And also as a way to stir up the Soviets into spending more money and wasting their time. If that we were saying or not pretending or leading people on about UFOs, then the Soviets will think, oh, well, either they've got UFOs and we need to be worried, or the Americans have these amazing, craft that can do all this stuff, and we need to start working our own. Now, it's a fact that the UFO community has been in the past monitored and investigated by the federal government. Again, this is not kooky stuff. You can find it in this book and many others. But the thing is that the problem is with these guys is that a lot of them were extremely susceptible to manipulation by foreign agents. Oh, well, what did you see? Tell it to me. Oh, I'm sure it's a UFO. Now, what kind of exhaust pattern did it have? And, how large was it? And meanwhile, Ivan's going back to the Kremlin with his own interpretation of what was probably American military craft. I think that that's probably an explanation for a lot of this is that it's, propaganda efforts, or maybe not propaganda, but psychological operations to basically hide what kind of military technology we have at any given time. That's what I think, and it's part of a crazy, espionage game that our government plays. I'd love to think that there were aliens, and who knows, maybe there are. I'm not out, completely rejecting the premise. But I think that maybe at least a large percentage of what's going on can be laid at our government's feet, and not in any kind of spooky signing an accord with the, Zeta Reticulans kind of way. Just more, hey, Skunkworks doesn't want us to know about the new stealth bomber kind of way.
Yeah, that's definitely possible. And when I was living in Las Vegas, I saw something one evening that was not a plane or a helicopter. That's all I can say about it. I don't think it was, from another world. I think most likely what it was an experimental aircraft coming from one of the bases that's out there in the desert, because all the guys who work at these bases actually they leave in the early morning from McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. And one time I was leaving early on a business trip, and I actually saw their plane, which I only knew about because I had seen a special about it on like the History Channel or something. And it was pretty cool to see that actually exists, that there is a huge unmarked chartered airplane that takes these engineers out in the desert really early every morning to do their work. And people don't realize not only how powerful this government is, but how much of it is done under total secrecy. And a lot of that's legitimate. We don't want the Russians or the Chinese or somebody like that to be able to just Google and see what our next generation of stealth aircraft looks like,
I agree. I think secrecy does have a use, and to think otherwise is just idealism. The fact that if we open the doors, that the guys in the next country over aren't going to come walking without their own malign interests or competing interests with our own. And certainly military technology is one aspect where we do require a certain degree of security. But it's funny to me that people will go to Area 51 and will sit there and watch the skies. And some of them will actually believe that there's alien craft. It's like, what, talking about a case of Occam's razor, which is more likely that there's a secret, Air Force base that's testing, UFOs and talking to aliens out in the desert, or it's a secret Air Force base that's testing new weapons and vehicle technology. Which one do you really think it is?
Right. Well, that's the same thing as the climate change argument. is which one's more likely that, climate change is occurring because 99% of mainstream established scientists tell us it's occurring, or that there's this massive conspiracy of scientists who are liberal in nature and are misleading us and some kind of misguided attempt to make us clean up the Earth. I think it's more likely that the Earth is actually changing, that climate change is real to some extent. I think that, talk about Occam's razor, I think that's by far the simplest explanation.
Well, even the hardest of conservatives now are, I think, backpedaling from the whole climate change as a myth thing and retreating into more, is climate change a naturally occurring phenomena, or is it anthropogenic? Is it that human beings are causing it, or is it part of a great cycle of some sort, or is it a mixture of those two? Now, that's the part where I like you would probably trust the scientists to figure out. I'm too ignorant on the matter to, really figure it out myself. But even in that, there's a lot of political, back and forth and manipulation of the facts to suit this or that agenda. But it's interesting to me, having been born in the early 70s and growing up through the 80s and 90s and watching this all evolve, to watch those very same guys backpedal from, this isn't true, this isn't happening, it's a fringe theory, to, okay, well, it's probably happening, but maybe we don't have anything to do with it. It's amazing change, and it really shows I think, the slipperiness of their position.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're going to trust the scientists to figure out the details, and I think one of the great things about our current society, there aren't a lot of good things to be said about the explosion in population. It's led to food shortages and wealth, problems of people trying to just get enough to get by. And one of the great things that has emerged from a higher human population on this planet, though, is that we have such a degree of specialization that there is somebody out there whose full-time job is just to analyze weather patterns in one part of Antarctica, and that person can make enough money to get by doing that and make a career out of it. And, if you were to go back a couple hundred years, there was maybe like a science guy in the town that you could talk to. There weren't hundreds of people working on this one problem across the planet and interacting in real time with each other via the internet. So I think that's really exciting, And there's actually a theory, I forget what it's called, but it's like the opposite of what's the really negative view of humankind? It's like Hobbesian, right?
You got me, man.
Oh, well, okay, so...
I wish I could tell you.
No. Malthusian is what I'm thinking of, where, just a really dark vision of, too much population and all that. I think there's a counter theory, which is that technological innovation, leapfrogs when you have higher population density. And it talks about, technological innovations in Europe, when they got higher population levels in their cities. And it's this cool theory that makes you optimistic that whatever problems we face over the next, 10 or 20 years, we're going to be able to confront those problems and solve them by using better technology and better communication.
Well, I certainly hope so. I don't know if I'm that optimistic about it. I, at this point, think that, we're too far along on the ride to step off now. What's going to happen is going to happen. And I do think technology and human endeavors do have a hope of ameliorating at least some of the very worst aspects of it. Now, whether something's going to happen in the meantime, like another 1918 style flu pandemic, or some sort of nuclear war, God only knows what, that will impact the population, is certainly up for question as well. I guess what I'm saying is that I'm a little darker on that than maybe you are. I think that maybe the population is going to prove to be more of a problem than we can keep up with. That may be that quality of life for a lot of people, especially in the first world, is going to have to drop, whether we wanted to or not, either because the resources are dwindling in the third world to feed our appetites, or it's just that we're just going to have to do that so more people, either in our lands and elsewhere, won't starve.
Well, there's some very dark theories circulating around the internet that part of the reason why we're seeing all these surveillance cameras and all of these rapid grabs for our basic rights is that there has been some kind of weird conspiracy of the major Western governments to cut down on population. in the coming years in terms of really serious birth control from here on out, and maybe even banning certain classes of people from reproducing. Really scary Orwellian stuff.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about was a memorandum written up by Kissinger back in the early 70s, and I can't remember exactly which one it was. I read it the other day just because it had come up in conversation, and that's exactly what he was talking about. But from what I gathered from it, it was more support for, and again, this is shady backdoor kind of dealing kind of stuff, but support for, zero population movements and aggressively supplying birth control to developing nations and things like that. It wasn't the, we're going to put fluoride in the water and kill everybody or,
right.
or that kind of thing. I think that's a necessity, but it's also one that we need here as well. We need more people to be educated about birth control and maybe when it is the right time to have a family and when it isn't, but it's a matter of personal responsibility, one that we ultimately can't mandate. Like anything else, we can provide the education, but we can't make people make the right choices.
I agree, and I'm terrified of governments that have the power to say, "Look, you're only allowed to have one kid."
No, it's terrible.
Or you're not smart enough, or you're not wealthy enough, so you're not allowed to reproduce. I think that is so terrifying because then it's a very slippery slope from that to you're not contributing enough to this society, so you no longer deserve to be alive.
Well, I certainly agree, and that is, I think, one aspect of that Kissinger memo as well. That maybe exploring the idea that certain people shouldn't be allowed to have children. It's and the other flip side of that, an even darker side, is that then you get into not just preventing quote unquote inferior people from having children. You start getting into trying to cultivate a better human being, or as it's better known, eugenics. Which is a morally objectionable idea on a lot of fronts.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Nazis were interested in that kind of line of thinking.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about the fluoride thing, because this is something that I personally don't know anything about, and I've had a couple of listeners ask me to look into the water problem. What are people talking about when they freak out about fluoride?
Well, people freak out about fluoride because for a variety of reasons. First there's the general principle reason. And before I even say this, I'm no expert on fluoride. I don't speak for anybody. It's just my own personal observations. They worry about, for one thing, it's the objection that the government shouldn't have a right to put something in my water supply. The second reason I've uncovered is that people think that it causes cancer. And then the third, more kind of out there idea is that people think it makes people stupid, that it lowers IQ. Fluoride is present in almost all water. If you're living in a town on a public water supply, you've got fluoride in your water. Fluoridation efforts really are more about adjusting the level of that fluoride, putting more fluoride in rather than putting in fluoride where it wasn't present to begin with. There's been some studies that, particularly there was one recently that an anti-fluoridation group jumped on and said it showed that there were, children with lower IQs in areas that, had fluoride in the water. And actually from studying the thing, what it shows really is that in areas with first mega doses of fluoride, like here I'm going to pour a 10-pound bag of fluoride in your drinking water. And also people that are in areas that don't necessarily have the same standards, Western standards of health and nutrition that we do, that these children had lower IQ. It's there's a lot of confounding variables there. And I don't know if it's necessarily one that can apply to America's water systems and what we do. The cancer thing is, I think, another thing that the government will generally tell you is either not true or damn unlikely. I don't, I'm like I said, I'm not an expert on this, and it's an explosive issue. I will tell you that I personally drink fluoridated water, and I'm not cancer-ridden. And as far as I know, I haven't lost any IQ points. Maybe my listeners will say otherwise. I think it's something that deserves a good bit of looking into before you jump into an argument on it, one side or the other.
Right. But maybe if you weren't drinking the fluoridated water, you would be like a John Nash level organizer of millions of people and would be able to stop the fluoridation on a mass scale.
My pineal gland would open up.
Yeah, your pineal gland, and you would turn into a beam of light and be able to
reptoid.
A reptoid. You'd be able to communicate with the reptoids.
Yeah, man, Staggs. So, like I said, I understand people's objections to it, and maybe my own viewpoint is a little more, mainstream that people would really like. But it's a free world. Go out there and check it out. And if you don't support fluoride in your community, go to your city council meetings, go to your county supervisor meetings. These things are almost always voted in.
Yeah, but based on what you just told me, putting aside any conspiracy ideas, I don't like the idea that local or state governments are pumping a chemical into our water based on some science that's probably from the 30s and 40s. And we know now that so much of the science from back then is just garbage. I mean, they were doing the best they could with the information they had. But, for example, during World War II, they didn't know that licking a paintbrush, which contained radioactive... Yeah, the radioactive paint.
Wasn't it a little earlier than that?
Oh.
I don't know. Maybe you're right.
But
the thing is, research hasn't stopped. It hasn't calcified. There is continuing to be... There's more research, and there continues to be more research. But, I'm not... I skew a little libertarian, generally my own beliefs, but I'm not a hard libertarian. I think government does have a place in parts of life. I don't think you should shut down the federal government completely. And one of the things is public health. A public health effort that was quite popular that the United Nations spearheaded and we were part of was the elimination of smallpox. And I think probably part of that was chasing down people that did not want the smallpox jab and giving it to them. Is that something we should have done?
I don't know. I mean, I think with public health, you do need to lean more libertarian. That's my view. You need to provide resources for people, but you can't mandate really anything. I think when you start telling people what to do with their own bodies, you're trampling on their constitutional rights.
Well, I can't disagree with that. Are we telling people what to do with their own bodies, though? What's the fluoride thing, from what I understand, just to stick with that topic, is one that's voted in. I don't think anybody just shows up in your town and white biohazard suits and starts pumping fluoride in your water.
Right.
As far as I know, that's the way it is in Mississippi. That there's funds that exist for fluoridation, and the cities and counties. Actually, I think it's municipals bring the funds in and do it. They agree to it, and there's public hearings and everything else.
Yeah, I'm glad you sort of debunked that for me because I get people asking me to cover that, and my whole issue when people ask me to go after something like that, or something like the chemtrails, or any of these other things, or maybe cell phone radiation, is you're talking about something that's going to require months or years of dedicated research, and I'll still probably hit a dead end, versus things where all I have to do is look up the bill text and call up the lawyer from the ACLU, and they will tell me, yes, the U.S. government right now is fighting very hard for the right to imprison Americans without a trial. So that's, for me, that's clearly the priority, because it's not something that needs to be fleshed out over years. It's something where the evidence is right in front of you, and if we get enough awareness in time, we can actually change it. And the same with the warrantless wiretapping stuff. That's not like fluoride where we can have a discussion about it for the next hour. It's more like, okay, this is happening, so is this a good use of taxpayer dollars, and is it a violation of the Fourth Amendment or not? And it's a pretty cut and clear case.
Well, I want to say something. I don't have listen to me. I don't have a monopoly on truth. I would never claim to have one. And what I do have are my own opinions that I've, built upon listening to different people and researching different things. I'm not going to say it's your opinion, but, it's a free country, get out and vote, get out and change things. Question your, local politicians, which I think has far more of an impact on your standard of living than going after, the feds, especially your president and things like that. I think you should do that, hold their feet to the fire, but, don't think that you can't actually get out and talk to people in your own community and go, what the hell are you doing? And, if you think fluoride's bad for you, here's some information. Here's another guy that says it's bad for you, and maybe I want you to reconsider voting for it.
Yeah, that's great.
The message.
That's great that you're also saying, look, this is my opinion, because I feel like one of the issues right now in America is these experts on certain topics, and certainly you're a media expert on things of, like you said, things that are not necessarily being covered elsewhere. These people come out and they're unwilling to tell you at the end that, look, this is an informed opinion. It's not absolute, unquestionable truth. And
people don't like anything but formed opinions. It makes them uncomfortable. They'd rather have things that are open and shut, just like Democrat or Republican, black or white.
Yeah, you never hear these guys on Fox. They go on some tirade about something, and at the end, I would like them to say something along the lines of, but I haven't done all the research. We don't know exactly what the deal is yet. They never say that. It's always like, this is the way it is. You better believe this or you're one of them. And you want to be one of us. You don't want to be one of them,
Well, that's something that people do a lot. I've pretty much given up on talking about politics, say on Facebook, which is a problem in and all of itself until after the election. Because at this point, if you criticize either candidate, people will assume you support the other one. And there just can't be any person on earth in their mind that doesn't support their guy or supports the other guy, and that's the way they want things to be, that, either you're a saint or a devil, and anybody that wants to be in the middle of that freaks people out.
Yeah, like it's like saying put on some sunblock and, I don't want you to get skin cancer. And then someone coming up to you and being like, oh, yeah, so you support breast cancer? And it's like, I don't know where this black and white thing came from, where criticizing Obama's disastrous civil rights record somehow means
get you in trouble quick.
Automatically means that you are a, ardent Mitt Romney supporter. And they go, well, who are you going to vote for? And I go, that's not even the issue. Who cares who I'm going to vote for? The issue is I'm calling out these power abuses. So who I decide to show up for and vote, that doesn't matter as much as us talking about this and pressuring his administration to stop some of these practices.
Yeah, I've been getting the third-party line a whole lot, that you're throwing away your vote, that you might as well vote for the lesser of the two evils, and voting your conscience is a bad idea because, boy, your conscience isn't going to be worth anything if Mitt Romney or Obama wins or whichever one these people are against. I just, what kind of nation is that where you tell someone that you shouldn't vote anymore for the candidate that you think is correct, but rather the one that you think is going to win? It's just twisted to me. It's unhealthy. And if we all continue to do that, how are things going to change? You yourself aren't representing a particular party from what I understand. So instead, should I ignore you and look to the establishment candidate and their party for answers? Simply because
I'm an independent. I think the internet, luckily, is hopefully our saving, our safety here and our lifeline. That you no longer need some old corrupt party to back you. If you have hundreds of thousands of supporters online and each of them contributes $25 or $50 to your campaign, you're suddenly at the same fundraising level as that mainstream party ticket candidate.
Well, at least until they shut it down. I'm sure they will. Somehow.
I mean, you're already seeing attacks on internet freedoms. And luckily technology moves so fast that people are going to be able to get around it through less credible means. But I don't think we should have to do that. We have a constitutional right to things like freedom of speech and freedom of the press. So why should people have to use like a VPN or proxy servers or any of this nonsense to avoid government intrusion or government censorship down the line?
Well, it's ridiculous. But I think at some point all that's going to come crashing down anyway. Eventually, whether it's through these illicit means or otherwise, people are going to get tired of it. Even the people that are just tired after a day of work are going to come home one day and go, look, enough is enough.
That hasn't happened in China, though. Somebody types in Tiananmen Square into Google and they get that zero results. You haven't really seen that change.
Well, are we China? We're not China, are we?
We are not China. But my point there is that don't assume that people getting annoyed will actually change anything. I want to end this because I know we're approaching the hour or maybe a little bit over.
Sure.
I want to end this by talking about the idea of things crashing down. We were talking about Spain earlier in this episode, and I think you said something like, what did you say? You're like, well, like that's over there. It's not over here. And The real issue that I see is that when you see these protests on YouTube, the massive unrest in Spain, we're not looking at Tehran or some spur of the moment protest in Afghanistan somewhere. We're talking about a country that is intimately linked to the European financial system and actually intimately linked to the U.S. financial system. There's a lot of U.S. bank money in Spain, and Banco Santander, or however you pronounce it, is one of the banking giants of the world. They're like the J.P. Morgan Chase of Spain. And they're not some third world country. This is Spain we're talking about. They were once a world empire. And if they go down as fast as it looks like they're going down, there are going to be some major confidence issues, and that could very easily spill over into U.S. markets. And if we saw the same kind of thing here, knowing how crazy our government responds, even to peaceful Occupy protesters, I don't know what's going to happen.
Well, I want to clarify first that I said that was the opinion of people.
Oh, right. No, that's that's not your opinion. That was sort of, you were showing, I think, how the mainstream media is able to frame this. This is something over there. It's not here. And so, therefore, we don't have to cover it nonstop.
Well, what I can add to that is that I've seen how people respond during disasters. We had a little thing called Katrina pushed through here a few years back. And, there's some chaos. People do act like jerks, a few of them, but people are going to act like jerks anyway. At the end of the day, most people start rebuilding. Most people start sharing stuff. I think a lot of people have this idea that if something horrific happens, like an economic crash, that suddenly we're going to have people riding around in road warrior buggies, carrying chainsaws. And I don't think it's going to happen that way. I really don't. There'd be problems, but we'd get through it somehow. I just don't. And I said this earlier on Twitter that the belief in an apocalypse is in some ways this sort of belief in a just world, that people kind of look forward to it.
It's a fantasy. It's a dark fantasy.
And the fantasy is that the bad guys are going to get what's coming to them, and the good guys are going to come out okay. And the thing is that none of us are necessarily good guys. We're a mix. We're not the angel or the devil. And it's just the same thing as the Christian rapture. That, oh, wait, you guys, you sinners are going to burn in hell. Just wait till you see me with my angel wings. And so as much as people fear these things, they also kind of get excited about them too. And from what I've seen, people don't act this way.
Well, if you look at economic crashes in other countries, what happens is life still goes on. I mean, they issue a new currency, and maybe the credit rating of that country is significantly damaged, and people are less wealthy from that point on, and things are difficult. But it's not as if you wake up one day and that idea of money is no longer in people's minds, and it's only, the stuff you have in your apartment now, that's yours, and you cannot obtain anything else. That's why I think it's so weird. These people are hoarding canned goods and gold coins, as if those are the only things you'll be able to trade.
I think that's a good idea. It's always good to be prepared, but that's the same thing with preparing for a hurricane.
Well, in my apartment, I have some canned goods and some batteries and stuff, and it's not for the apocalypse. It's because I live in South Florida, and if we get hit with a hurricane, it could be 2 or 3 weeks before there are resupplies, and in the meantime, you don't want to starve,
But you've seen what happens. Have you been hit with a hurricane before?
I've managed to fly out of here every time in time, so.
Okay, well, I was pretty far inland, but, power shut off for a week, groceries didn't get in, gasoline didn't get in. We all kind of just got together, and further, as cynical as I am about the government, the local state government did pretty okay, and the feds kind of did okay too. It was a little while before they got the hang of it, but we got through it. New Orleans, it was damaged, devastated, and I'm not painting a rosy picture there, but you didn't see the streets running red with blood either. People are going there now. It's not like it's smoking ruin.
Yeah, and that's what you're saying is encouraging, and it also sort of jives with what I've been thinking as I do more research about this stuff, which is that when economic collapse comes in some form, which is headed to the U.S., I hate to say it, but
I think so too.
We're due for a correction. We're now at $16 trillion of debt. We're hitting that point where the people lending us money, the governments lending us money, are about to say, you're done. Like, you've gone over your limit. The same as a credit card company. A credit card company, this is something I know a lot about because I founded Credit Card Outlaw, which is a big credit card deals comparison site. they'll give you a line, and then there's that certain point you hit where you just have too much out there. And then no bank anywhere will give you $1 more until they've seen you pay down your debts below like a 30% utilization ratio. And it's different for governments. If you're the U.S. government, you have it a lot easier than a credit card borrower. But there's still a point you hit where people go, enough. You have to start paying down what you have. And when that hits, they're going to start doing the same stuff that's being done in Europe, austerity, cutting back on programs that people need, things like Social Security, things like basic Medicare. And when that happens, there's going to be a lot of unhappiness.
Right. I can't disagree with that. And in some ways, I think that a correction would not be necessarily a bad thing, as long as we're not starving in the streets. But, I think that maybe we could realign some of the ways that we're spending our money here, and we could go on for hours about that. But, I agree. It's probably coming, but I also don't think it's going to be people hanging street lamps and, going on zombie marauder mode and breaking into people's houses. That being said, I've got a few magazines of ammunition and a couple of weapons here. So I won't say that it's a bad idea to be prepared either,
Well, even having a weapon, it's not like if you decide to have a firearm for that reason, it's not like you're worried about some long, drawn-out battle like Cormac McCarthy's The Road, like some post-apocalyptic journey. The bigger problem is that if we get that economic collapse where the U.S. suddenly has hyperinflation or massive deflation, whatever it is, or a big government default, whatever happens, there are going to be a couple weeks where things are up in the air and people are going to be freaking out. And
even the feds tell you that. FEMA tells you that. Be prepared for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and during that period of time, you don't want some idiot to mug and kill you just because you happen to be walking across the street to the CVS. So maybe it's not a bad idea to have, a pistol or something.
Everybody says that. The government will not tell you differently. They're not giving a line about we'll be there immediately. Then they're telling the truth. Be prepared to take care of yourself for a little while. But that's the same for a hurricane or anything else.
Yeah, and I know we do have to end this, but it's so fascinating. I could just keep talking forever. I think in some ways...
That's my problem.
yeah. I think in some ways a quick, abrupt... Again, like I'm not hoping for economic collapse, but if something really abrupt happens where we all have to marshal our resources and rethink the way our currency works and some of these basic economic issues, if that happens, in a lot of ways, that's an easier way for us to fix the problem than if we just slowly decay over the next 2 decades.
Well, who's to say we got to do either? Who's to say that we can't get good leadership in, like yourself, and fix this?
Right.
And again, you said don't expect people to get pissed off and change things. But, sometimes getting pissed off is what fires people enough to go change things.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you combine people realizing there's a problem with this change in mentality when you make it so that it's a game and so that it's fun and enjoyable. And it's a social thing. You can meet other people who are interested in this stuff. Then real change can occur.
What happens now when somebody beats someone up, a police officer or someone's caught lying? Cameras pop out. Cell phones come out. Hell, if necessary, we can bring back the printing press. It's not hard to print broadsheets. I think it'd be an ominous sign to have a bunch of people go to a political event and start clicking their ballpoint pens at once. We're ready to record anything you have to say, and we'll make sure everybody else knows about it. So watch yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be cool to see a more vigilant public in terms of everybody sharing information and ideas and photos and videos from events. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I got to make sure this gets out there as widely as possible because it's such a great conversation. I mean, we went from the S-25 protests in Spain to UFOs in Nevada to where we are right now. So thank you so much.
I should probably be on ADD medicine.
No, I think conversations like this is the way that two people talk. And this is much closer to a real conversation. I mean, it is a real conversation. But this I think, is much closer to the way media should be instead of some hyper-produced TV segment where you have to get in talking points. I mean, what the hell is a talking point? You should be allowed to just talk. You shouldn't have a point. So...
Yeah, well, that's an invention of the media age, and it's one going away, with the long-form entertainment options like this. But if I can really quick, ask people to follow me on Twitter at MATTST AGGS, and check me out on Disinfo.com. I've got a podcast there called the Disinfo Cast.
Yeah, I was gonna plug you after you left, but yeah, that's good as well. So at Matt Staggs on Twitter,
Yep.
and Disinfocast on iTunes. And if you search for Disinfocast and subscribe, the most recent episode is Matt actually interviewing me. So that's a fascinating conversation too, because we got more into my congressional campaign and all of that good stuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you.
Take care.